Hello, this is video 2 of a 3-part series on tests in Blackboard. This video will cover deploying a test, which will focus on the test settings, which will determine the way in which your students interact with the test that you've created. We'll begin by navigating to our content area, and from the assessments menu, we'll choose test. Remember, anything in the assessments menu will automatically create a grade center column so that we don't have to do that manually. Once we select tests, we have the option of creating a test if we haven't already, but for us, we've already created quiz 1 here in our previous video, so we'll select quiz 1 and click submit. You do have the option of renaming the test. I want to caution you that you want to use good naming conventions if you choose to do that, because you're not actually renaming the test itself, just this link within the content area that connects to it. So you want to be able to match those up if things get a little confusing in your course. We have the full text editor, and again, if you see only one line of tools, pop that out on the right hand side. You can add information here for students about what the test will be covering. You can add resources, maybe a study guide. You have access to the entire text editor, so you can add multimedia functions in there as well. You can set the test to open in a new window, but that's not necessary. Then in the test availability settings, this is going to have one of the biggest impacts on the way your students interact with the test in your course and the experience that they have. There's no right or wrong answer to the way these test settings are selected for the most part, but it's something that you want to thoughtfully consider because it really will have a big impact on your students. The first setting is the make link available setting, and you do want to always select yes on that. If you want to limit the time and date range that students can access the test, you can do so later in the availability settings, but you do want this to always be set to yes. You have the option of creating an announcement for the test automatically in the course here. You can always manually create your own announcement, and we do have a previous video on creating announcements. The number of attempts and that students can access the test are set right here. You can, by default, it's 1, so they can take the test 1 time. You can allow multiple attempts, including unlimited or a specified number. So if you want to give students 2 attempts at a test and then maybe take the highest of the 2 scores, you can do that, or you can allow them unlimited number of attempts, and that's helpful if it's a practice test that you want students to sort of skill and drill on until they have completely mastered it. So you do have those options there. If you select the multiple attempts option, either a specified number or the unlimited attempts, you'll notice that it enables the score attempts using option. And this is where you would determine which of those multiple attempts will be graded. So you have the option of grading the last attempt as the final grade, the highest grade, the lowest grade, the first attempt, or the average. So you have any of those options. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. It just depends on what's going to best facilitate the material and the learning in your course. The forced completion option is an option that requires a lot of thought, because selecting that option means that if students lose connection to a test, and this is particularly important in online courses, if a student is taking a test and they lose connection to the test for whatever reason, their internet connection drops, the power goes out, their computer explodes, whatever happens, if they lose connection to the test, then they won't be able to get back to the test without you overriding it for them or a Blackboard administrator doing so. So it's an option that's certainly available, and a lot of instructors like to use that because they don't want students to access the test and then see the questions and then leave the test and study some more and come back to it. So that's why it's often used. Sometimes it can create problems if a student legitimately encounters a technical difficulty and loses connection to a test, but also if a student does exactly that, they're in a test and they see that they're not prepared and they leave the test to study and then they come back, that having that selected will prevent them from doing that. Then you do have the option of setting a timer. You can set the timer to any number of minutes. The timer in and of itself will not automatically submit a test when the student has run out of time. It will just indicate to you that the student went over the amount of time when you're grading the attempt. Turning the auto submit on will automatically submit the test when the timer expires, and this will happen about 5 to 7 minutes after the timer expires, and the reason for that discrepancy has to do with the syncing of the Blackboard servers and the internet refresh rate and those kind of things. So one thing to remember about using a timer in general, whether you have auto submit on or off, is that a warning box will display to students, and if they click OK on the warning box, which is fairly typical to dismiss a warning box, it will actually submit the attempt for them. They have to click the cancel button in order to continue taking the test. So some students don't really pay attention to that, and then they accidentally submit their test before they're actually ready to do so. Now here are those display restriction options that I mentioned before, and that's why you always want to have that very first option set to yes, because if you want to restrict the dates and times that students can access the test, you have that option right here. So you can check the boxes on those and set the dates and times according to however you wish them to be set. Then you can set a password by checking the box and entering a password here, and this is often used for, again, online classes when you have a proctored exam, so students have to go into an approved testing location with an approved testing proctor who will enter the password for them. So it's not so much of an issue with seated courses. Now you do have the option to extend test availability to certain users in the course, to certain students or groups of students in the course, and to do so you would click add user or group. You would see a new box pop up and you can search for users. In this course I only have the one user, so I can select that particular student and click submit, and then I can set exceptions for that student. So this is helpful if you have a student with disabilities, or if you have especially in online courses, a lot of times we'll have students who are in the military and they may be overseas, so they don't have access to the internet during certain windows of time. So you can adjust the time at which they can access the test, the timer limits for students with disabilities, the number of attempts you can change for individual students. So it's a very helpful setting, and to get rid of that you can just click the X there and you will be prompted with a warning. So that's how you would add exceptions for specific students who need a different test window or different test options available to them. Here you have the due date settings, and due dates are really helpful. Again, they do add that item to the calendar which students have access to, whether or not you're using the calendar function in your course. It can be very helpful, and if you'd like to learn more about the functionality of the calendar, check out our videos on the calendar. You do have the option of not allowing students to start the test after the due date has passed. So if you don't have an availability window set, you want students to continuously access the test, but you don't want them to be able to start the test past the specified due date, you do have that option right there. Now the self-assessment options, they give very specific information here. You want to leave this, if this is a test that's going to count for a grade, that you want to be able to see if you want to be able to see the right and wrong and percentages and calculations for the test in any way, you want to keep this at the default, include in the Grade Center. Otherwise it will be completely hidden from you and you won't be able to see statistics or student grades or answers or download the results or anything. So it will be like it doesn't exist in the course for you as the instructor, and it only exists for students. So you don't want to select that option. Most of the time it won't be something that's helpful. Then in the test results and feedback to students, these are some very important options here. So you can choose what type of information students see after they submit the test, or on a specified date, or after the due date, or after the availability date, or after all attempts are graded. So you, by default, after submission, students will see their score. So they will know what their score was on the test. If you want them to see all of the answers, that's the answer choices that were available, the answers they submitted, and then the correct answers. You can choose any combination of those. Feedback, you should select almost all the time, because if you've bothered to enter that feedback, like we discussed in the previous video, you don't want to have entered all that information and then have students not benefit from it. So those are good options to select all the time. A lot of instructors want students to be able to see their score, of course, after they submit, but then they don't want the answer key displayed until all of the tests have been graded, and then students can see all of their questions and all of the answers and what the correct answers were supposed to be. And you can decide any combination of those and any date ranges that you would like on those. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. You just need to thoughtfully consider what's going to benefit your students and your instruction most. The test presentation mode is also something that really impacts the way students encounter your test. All at once is just as we're seeing the options on this screen. All the test questions would be presented up and down in a list, which students could scroll back and forth through and answer the questions in any order they choose. The presentation mode of one at a time gives a student one question, then they have to click next to the next question, next for the next question, and so on. It does create a little more weight on the servers and a little more processing for Blackboard, so students on slower connections might have issues with the one at a time mode, but it's fairly stable for most users. Prohibit backtracking means that a student in one at a time presentation mode, students are not going to be able to go back to previous questions, and a lot of times instructors don't want students to be working through and get to a question which sort of clues them into the answer of a previous question and then go back and change their answer, which can it's an effective setting. However, students will at some point attempt to click back, even though the instructions will automatically tell them not to do that, and then they'll lose connection to a test and then they might panic. So it's just something to think about before you enable that option. Then randomizing the questions does exactly that. It shuffles the questions, so if you have unlimited attempts for a student, every time they access the test, the questions will be in a different order. And that can be good if you do have unlimited attempts and it's a skill and drill and you don't want them to memorize the order of the answers, but actually learn the material. And then it's also good, a lot of instructors like that, to prevent students from sitting sort of, what did you get for number 4 or whatever. So you have the option to randomize the questions, and it's a very effective method whether you're using a single attempt or multiple attempts. And those are the test question set, or the test settings. Once we have completed all of our selections there, we click submit, and the test is now deployed. Here it is in our quiz 1 deployed so that students can access it and take the test. And in video number 3, we will discuss reusing questions and exporting and importing tests from course to course.